I think I found one of the best alternatives to Claude Code, and almost nobody is talking about it. It is called Reasonix. I have been using it myself. And this is not just another terminal wrapper that sends your files to an AI model. Reasonix can explore a real repository, plan a task, edit multiple files, run commands, test its own work, launch subagents, and keep going until the job is finished. In other words, it does the kind of work people use Claude Code for. But instead of locking you into an expensive coding plan, Reasonix is open source and lets you connect DeepSeek V4 Flash, one of the cheapest capable coding models available. And this is where the combination becomes almost ridiculous. In the last 30 days, my DeepSeek API account processed more than 1.1 billion tokens, mostly with V4 Flash. The total bill was only $9.45. So, in this video, I will show you why DeepSeek has become so interesting for coding, why Reasonix was built specifically around it, how much this setup really costs, and whether it is actually good enough to replace Claude Code for everyday development. By the end, you will know where Reasonix can become your main coding agent, and when paying for a stronger model still makes sense. Before Reasonix makes sense, DeepSeek has to make sense. Claude Opus is still one of the best models for difficult coding work, but most tasks do not need the most expensive model at every step. DeepSeek V4 Flash changes that calculation. On an important software engineering benchmark, V4 Flash reaches roughly 89% of the Opus 48 score. That does not make the two models equal, but it shows that Flash can get surprisingly close while costing far less. And for normal development work, that difference can feel smaller than the benchmark gap suggests. Most coding sessions are not impossible debugging problems. They involve reading files, adding tests, fixing normal bugs, and building features that follow patterns already in the project. In my own use, DeepSeek is already strong enough to handle a large part of that work. And it does not need to beat Opus at everything. If it can complete most everyday tasks for a fraction of the price, paying for Opus on every request stops making sense. But a capable model and a cheap API still do not give you a complete coding agent. That is where Reasonix comes in. DeepSeek can understand code, but it cannot open your repository or run a test by itself. It needs software that gives it access to your files, terminal, and development tools. That is what Claude Code does for Claude. Reasonix does it for DeepSeek. Reasonix now supports other AI providers, but it was originally built specifically for DeepSeek. During a long coding session, the agent sends the same instructions, conversation, and project context many times. DeepSeek calls this repeated information cached input, and it charges much less for it. Reasonix keeps the repeated part stable, so DeepSeek can continue recognizing it as cached. According to Reasonix, long sessions can keep more than 90% of their input cached. That is the important relationship. DeepSeek provides the intelligence. Reasonix turns it into a complete coding agent while protecting the low price. And once you see the actual prices, the reason for this design becomes obvious. This is where Reasonix becomes really interesting. When DeepSeek's cache is used properly, V4 Flash can cost more than 50 times less than Claude Opus 4.8. And Reasonix was built specifically to keep that cache working during long coding sessions. Instead of paying the full price every time the agent reads the same conversation and project context, most of that repeated information becomes extremely cheap. This is not just a theoretical saving. Over 30 days, my DeepSeek account processed 1.1 billion tokens for $9.45. Most of my usage was cached context. So I'm not saying everyone will process a billion tokens for $10. But that is the point. Reasonix is designed to create this kind of cache-heavy workflow. Reasonix itself is free and MIT licensed. You bring your own API key, and there is no additional Reasonix coding subscription. The price is impressive, but none of it matters if the agent cannot finish the work, so let us give it a real task. Open a project, start Reasonix, and give it a complete task, not just a few lines of code to write. For example, find why authentication sessions expire early, fix the bug, add a regression test, and do not change the public API. Reasonix first explores the project and finds the relevant files. It creates a plan, edits the code, and runs the tests. If a test fails, it reads the error and tries to fix the problem. When the task is complete, it shows you exactly what changed. This is why I call it a Claude Code alternative. You do not have to copy errors into a chat window and paste code back into your editor. Reasonix works directly inside the project. You can use it through the terminal, the desktop app, a local browser interface, or VS Code. But those interfaces are not the interesting part. What surprised me was how rarely the setup felt cheap. For normal bug fixes, tests, and feature work, it feels like a serious coding agent, not a cheap demo. And for larger tasks, it does not have to work alone. Suppose a feature touches the front end, the API, and the database. Reasonix can split that work between subagents. One can inspect the front end, another can study the back end, and a third can review the final change. This can use a lot of tokens because several agents are working at once. With Reasonix, V4 Flash can handle those jobs without making every subagent expensive. You can also use a stronger model for planning or final review, while Flash handles most of the volume. This lets you pay for a premium model only when the decision is genuinely difficult, not every time an agent reads another file. If you already use DeepSeek for coding, or if you have tried Reasonix, tell us in the comments what you use it for and how well it has worked. Real experiences will be far more useful to other viewers than benchmark numbers alone, because there is still one question we need to answer. Is Reasonix merely impressive for the price, or can it genuinely replace Claude Code? Yes. After using it myself, I think Reasonix is a real Claude Code alternative. For everyday development, it is capable enough to become your primary coding agent. That does not mean V4 Flash is secretly Opus under a different name. Opus is still more reliable on difficult tasks. Flash can misunderstand the project, choose the wrong approach, or need your help after a failed attempt. Cheap retries can still waste your time. If Flash keeps following the wrong approach, switching to a stronger model may be the cheaper choice. But this does not weaken the case for Reasonix. It makes the best way to use it clearer. Use V4 Flash for the majority of normal work. Use V4 Pro when you need stronger planning or review. And move to Opus when the problem is difficult enough to justify the price. You do not need to pay the premium price for the entire session just because one part of the task is difficult. So the real question is no longer whether Reasonix can replace Claude Code at all. It is which tasks still justify paying for Claude. Getting started is simple. During setup, choose DeepSeek and add your API key, then open a project and tell Reasonix what you want it to complete. If you prefer a graphical interface, the desktop app gives you sessions, approvals, checkpoints, and visible file changes. You can also use the browser interface or connect Reasonix to VS Code. When you first try it, keep approvals and the workspace sandbox enabled. Review the changes and require confirmation before dangerous commands. There is also one privacy detail you should understand. Reasonix runs the tools on your computer. But when you use the DeepSeek API, the code and context needed for the task are still sent to DeepSeek. It is not a fully local or air-gapped setup. Reasonix can connect to compatible or self-hosted providers, but then the speed, quality, and cost comparison changes. Reasonix with DeepSeek is not merely the cheapest coding setup I have tried. It is one of the few cheap setups that is genuinely good enough to become a main coding agent. DeepSeek V4 Flash is good enough for many normal coding tasks, while costing far less than premium models. Reasonix gives it the tools it needs to work inside a real project. The result is a direct alternative to Claude Code. It will not win every difficult task, but it can handle a surprisingly large part of everyday development for much less money. My recommended setup is simple. Reasonix as your main coding tool, V4 Flash for most tasks, V4 Pro for harder planning and review, and Opus only when the problem genuinely justifies it. If you want more real tests of AI coding agents, local models, and cheaper alternatives to expensive coding plans, subscribe to the channel. I test these tools with real projects and real usage so you can see which ones are actually worth using.